And good evening. We begin tonight with that breaking news out of Poland. An explosion reported near the border with Ukraine. New video just coming into top story showing smoke rising from the scene of that blast. Polish authorities say 2 civilians have been killed. The Polish defense minister late today saying it was a Russian-made missile that caused that explosion. First responders rushing to the scene. And that village you can see on this map right along the border with Ukraine. And on the other side of that border, Ukraine enduring the brunt of Russia's wrath today. This apartment building in Kyiv in flames. Putin launching a wide-ranging attack after losing the key city of Kherson. President Biden speaking with the Polish president just moments ago. Senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell is traveling with the president and joins us live tonight from Bali, where world leaders are meeting for the G20 summit. And Kelly, I know a lot of this information is just coming in. Polish authorities have confirmed that that missile was Russian-made. What is the White House saying right now?
Well, the White House is not confirming those details, letting Poland do the on-the-ground work. But what we do know is that U.S. officials say that they understand that precision has not been a strength of Russia in this war. And so culpability on Russia's part would be plausible, but they need more facts. So at this point, they want the investigation to go forward, and President Biden committed to giving U.S. resources to Poland to try to get at those facts, Tom.
Kelly, and there's been a lot of reporting out there. I want to make sure we get what we know right tonight. Has there been communication, though, between President Biden and the president of Poland yet?
Yes. So even before the sun, it's Wednesday morning here now, and before the sun came up here in the 5 a.m. hour, President Biden was on the phone with President Duda. And of course, it's important to remember Poland is a NATO ally. President Biden has already committed additional U.S. forces in the previous months to try to give some extra reinforcements to the eastern flank of NATO in Poland. There is an alliance there. He was on the phone with him this morning, offering whatever help he could. It's critically important because Poland is really at the doorstep of this war, and there's been a lot of concern about what could spill over. Is this an example of that? Again, they need more answers. The president also spoke to the head of NATO, the Secretary General, because there's always been a question about if this spilled over into NATO territory, what would the NATO alliance have to do? And so those will be questions that will be put to the leaders here at the G20, and it'll take a little time to assess that. Will there be consequences? Will there be a response? As they learn more, they'll have to formulate how to respond here. Tom?
And Kelly, before you go, you were mentioning NATO. We do know that there's going to be an emergency meeting tomorrow of NATO member states.
That's right. So they're already trying to get analysis, trying to get a game plan, putting the NATO members in a meeting to try to get an assessment of what happened here. You mentioned Russian-made. Russian-made is one piece of the puzzle. Was it fired by Russia? That's a key question. Trying to determine, was this an intentional act, an accident? Key questions that will be important. But even something that is an accident of war can still be something where there's a response needed. And that's part of what NATO will need to do. NATO's been a big player trying to support Ukraine, and the U.S. and other allies, especially in Europe, have given tremendous amounts of military aid and financial support, humanitarian aid. That's a big part of the conversation here with the G20. Today, the president will be meeting with the new prime minister of the United Kingdom. They'll continue the conversations. It has been a big topic, Russia and Ukraine, throughout the meetings here, and that will certainly continue now that this incident has taken hold of everybody's focus. Tom?
All right. Kelly O'Donnell traveling with the president with the latest information we have at this hour. Kelly, we appreciate it. For more on this developing story out of Europe, I want to bring in an expert. Retired 4-star U.S. naval officer Admiral James Stavridis. He led the NATO alliance in global operations from 2009 to 2013 as Supreme Allied Commander, and is here on Top Story tonight. Admiral, I can't think of a better guest to have on a night like this. So we know that Poland's foreign ministry says that it was a Russian-made missile, right, that exploded into this village in their country, killing 2 people very close to the border. We know that NATO members are now meeting tomorrow. If you were part of that meeting, as you once were, what are you listening for, and what are you telling the U.S. and other NATO countries? What would you be advising?
Tom, I'm listening for the facts. What I mean by that is I want more detail than this was a Russian missile. I want to know, where did it come from? Where did it land? How did it strike? What is the fragmentation pattern around it? What do we know that aligns with signals intelligence, human intelligence, satellites, which are capable of following that track? I want a very thorough laydown. Now, Tom, assuming, as I think is quite logical, that this is a Russian missile, probably not deliberate. If you're Vladimir Putin, you're not going to launch a couple of missiles to attack NATO. This is probably a strike against Lviv on the western border of Ukraine that went astray. What you are looking for are the facts. Then you can construct a response to what is probably an inadvertent mistake on the part of the highly unprofessional Russian military forces.
So, Admiral, I want to tell our viewers what they're looking at here. That video right there, that daytime video, was video of the explosion in this village. The other video we've been showing you is emergency response vehicles in Poland rushing to the scene of the explosion. This video right here, where we know at least 2 Polish citizens have died. You mentioned the word mistake. You mentioned that the Russians have been reckless as well. Those are my words, but you were making that point. Are mistakes allowed in war?
No, they are not without consequences. There are always mistakes. Missiles go to the wrong place. Forces conduct friendly fire. There are always mistakes, but there must be consequences. And as we look at Russian behavior throughout this war, the rape, the murder, the torture, the use of indiscriminate fires against apartment buildings, against children at train stations. This is yet another example of that. And Tom, I think there need to be consequences directed from the NATO alliance against the Russian Federation, assuming this is even a mistake, an inadvertent strike.
So, Admiral, I want you to walk our viewers through what Article 5 of the NATO Constitution is. If I can be as brief as possible, if you attack one nation, you attack all nations. Will this reach that level, and where do you think we go from here as a member of NATO?
It absolutely reaches that level. And whether it is an inadvertent attack or a deliberate attack, the point here, Tom, is that the 30 nations of NATO, U.S., Canada, 28 European nations, will stand together against the Russian Federation. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but has been a partner to NATO, and the NATO alliance will continue to help Ukraine push back against these Russian attacks. I'll close on this by saying that whether this is inadvertent or a deliberate attack, look for NATO to increase air defense on the NATO-Ukraine border. Look for NATO to perhaps provide additional fighter aircraft to Ukraine to shut down this kind of attack. And at the far end of the NATO response, Tom, look for NATO to at least consider a no-fly zone over Ukraine. There's a lot that's going to happen in the next few days.
Whatever happens, it sounds like there will be repercussions. Okay, Admiral Stavridis, we thank you for your time and your analysis. And we have some breaking news out of Mar-a-Lago. We want to pause for a special report.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Tom Llamas.
Moments ago, former President Donald Trump announced he will run again for president, officially kicking off his 2024 White House bid from his Mar-a-Lago compound in Florida. Here's a portion of what he said.
Tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. All of you. Thank you. Thank you. So many incredible friends and family here tonight. It's such a beautiful thing. Some people say, how do you speak before so many people all the time? When there's love in the room, it's really easy, if you want to know the truth. It really is. You ought to try it sometime. Together, we will be taking on the most corrupt forces and entrenched interests imaginable. Our country is in a horrible state. We're in grave trouble. This is not a task for a politician or a conventional candidate. This is a task for a great movement that embodies the courage, confidence, and the spirit of the American people. This is a movement. This is not for any one individual. This is a job for tens of millions of proud people working together from all across the land and from all walks of life, young and old, black and white, Hispanic and Asian, many of whom we have brought together for the very, very first time. If you look at the numbers, if you look at what's happened with Hispanic, with African American, with Asian, and just look at what's happening. This is a party that has become much bigger, much stronger, much more powerful, can do much more good for our country. This is a job for grandmothers and construction workers, firefighters, builders, teachers, doctors, and farmers who cannot stay quiet any longer. You can't stay quiet any longer. You're angry about what's happening to our country. Our country is being destroyed before your very eyes. It's a job for every aspiring young person and every hard-working parent, for every entrepreneur and underappreciated police officer who is ready to shout for safety in America. The police are being treated so badly. These are great people. They can straighten out the crime. They're the ones that know how to do it. We have to give them back their respect and their dignity. This will not be my campaign. This will be our campaign all together.
We were just listening to the former president there, Donald Trump, announcing his run for office 2024, trying to seek re-election one more time. It'll be his third presidential election. Among the issues he hit, inflation, border control, gas prices, crime, a lot of the same issues we heard from the GOP during these midterms. His campaign motto, if you will, America's comeback starts right now. Our NBC political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, joins us now. Chuck, we've been watching the speech as it's still ongoing in full transparency. We're running a portion of the announcement because obviously the former president had a lot to say. Some things true, some things not so true. What is your take on the speech so far? We were noticing the energy levels and the tone of the speech.
The energy seemed down. Maybe it's too late at night. Being at 9 o'clock at night, he seems, dare I pick a phrase, low energy. He just doesn't seem... I mean, I think about him going down the escalator the first time he announced. There was bravado in his voice. He doesn't. It is not a happy warrior tone. It really is. There, you can hear some of the bitterness in here of losing the presidency and having to get it back. You could tell someone wrote him a speech that says, hey, make this about the movement. Don't make this about you. So he articulated that very directly. But you can tell when the words aren't his. We've covered him a long time. Yeah. You always know when it's him, and you always know when it's something that's
when he's going off the prompter.
When he's going on, and when he's just reading from the teleprompter. But what's interesting is he's announcing at a time when a whole bunch of people in the Republican Party are begging him not to announce. Some of them are just like, can you delay a month? Wait for Herschel Walker. He did do before he officially announced, he did do a gesture to Herschel Walker's campaign. But I can't help but think all these Republican senators that are upset that he's announcing today, they actually had the power to prevent this moment. They chose not to convict him at that second impeachment after the January 6th insurrection. So it is interesting to hear them complain about this moment when they actually had the power to do something about that might have prevented this moment from ever happening.
He went back and reviewed his 4 years in office, and he left out, I'd say about the last 3 or 4 months, he left out COVID raging, and he left out January 6th, completely left that out, and then pivoted to start attacking the current president.
He did, and he's also trying to blame another country for his election loss. He threw that out there, trying to start a conspiracy theory there, and he's trying to paint Biden as the warmonger. It's interesting. He's trying to say, hey, I'm not the one. He's trying to paint President Biden as that. It is interesting, in talking with people around him, the way they're trying to make this seem better than it looks right now is, hey, he loves being the outsider. And if the establishment wants to attack, that's what they did in 2016, and it only made him stronger. What does fascinate me is he is intent on running an outsider campaign. He's going to go after the Republican Party almost as much as he goes after Joe Biden.
And with that, I want to bring in Hallie Jackson right now, an anchor here on NBC News Now, as well as MSNBC. Hallie, we met on the campaign trail in 2016, covering his first campaign. You followed him into the White House, and now 2024. starts today in 2022. I know you've been talking to Republican sources all over the party. The GOP, and I think Senator Ted Cruz really put it best. He said, if he's the nominee, I will support him. And I think that's the position a lot of Democratic, I should say Republican donors and Republican leaders are in right now.
Yeah, and Chuck knows this well. I was struck by his interview on Meet the Press on Sunday with Senator Bill Cassidy, who, by the way, is no Trump supporter, who wouldn't answer the question, right? If he is the nominee, would you support him? Let's be clear about what's happening tonight, Tom. I think it's important to lay this out because we've alluded to it, but you have now a former president whose actions inspired a violent insurrection at the Capitol as part of a push to illegitimately stay in power 2 years ago, the only president to have been impeached twice, making another run at the White House now, right? The third attempt to do this. He was successful in 2016, which is why you're seeing an interesting dynamic at play in this speech, I think. He is both simultaneously pointing to some of what he did in his 4 years in the White House, but also trying to time travel back to his winning campaign in 2016. I was told prior to the speech that there would be a lot of 2016 vibes in here. There are. He's being very explicit about it. It is not erasure of his time in office because he is still obviously citing what he did as president. He had sort of a head scratcher of a comment about how he went decades without war in his 4 years in office. Obviously, that's what he served. But he is both pointing to what he did in office, but also to before he actually made it into office. And Chuck is hitting on something important here. He will be running, and he wants to run, according to folks that I've talked with, an anti-Washington campaign, despite the fact that he was in Washington. He was the guy at the controls for 4 years, right, as the leader of the free world here. He also is trying to point to the scoreboard, to his grip on the Republican Party, because for years, right, ever since 2015, when he came down that golden escalator in a very different sort of vibe announcement, if you will, he has been able to point to the support of people in his base, right? The base that he created. You're seeing that moment there that we all remember so well, Tom. He is trying to point to that now by saying, hey, the Republican voters are with me. Because, yes, he will say, hey, the Republican establishment, they're not me. I've always fought against them. He'll point to Mitch McConnell. He'll point to the people that he isn't huge fans of inside the Republican Party, inside the Beltway. But he'll say the voters are with me, right? That has been his point all along. So when he cites the scoreboard in these midterm elections and says, hey, 200-plus people that I endorsed were backed by, Trump-loyal voters, what he's leaving out are that the 20-plus people who lost, right, the smaller number of people who he endorsed who did not win, were the most important ones. They were the ones who were going to deliver control of the Senate to Republicans and who did not. They were the ones who would have, if they had gotten into these positions as top elections officials or governors in some of these key states, potentially helped to foment insecurity and election fraud conspiracies around a potential 2024 campaign. They didn't make it into office, right? So it is interesting to me that he's talking about the scoreboard in a way that leaves out what is one of the most important pieces of context. And you know who else is talking about the scoreboard today, Tom? Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, in his first remarks responding to the attacks against him by former President Trump, ending his remarks by saying, well, you could say, look at the scoreboard on Tuesday. Ron DeSantis had a good night on election night, right? His state ended up red. The people he wanted to back ended up getting into office here. And I think as you're looking ahead to what is almost certainly going to be a contested primary here, that is going to be a dynamic at play. Can I just also say, you've also got people tonight trying to take advantage of this moment, and you might have seen it too. Governor Asa Hutchinson, for example, sort of cryptically tweeting, hey, as we're talking about 2024, I want to be a leader in the party as well. Like, you're going to start to see some of the floodgates open here for folks coming into the mix.
Yeah, we're going to have to wait and see what Republicans end up doing and what Governor Ron DeSantis does. I do want to bring in Kristen Welker, our chief White House correspondent. The Biden presidency, I don't know if it changes today, Kristen, but definitely President Biden will, over the next 2 years, will have to be answering questions about the former president, President Trump, and also probably responding to a lot of attacks that are going to be coming from Mar-a-Lago and wherever he takes his campaign.
Absolutely. There's no doubt. Look, advisors to the president are downplaying this announcement, one saying that former President Trump is irrelevant. But the Biden presidency changed right now. In fact, President Biden just tweeted out Donald Trump failed America with a list of different issues on which he is trying to make the case he failed America, on the economy, on protecting women's rights, and coddling extremists, according to President Biden and this tweet that he just sent out. So I think you're getting a preview of what we will see if, in fact, President Biden does throw his hat into the ring again. He said he intends to run. He's going to make a final decision in the new year, and he has stressed that his final decision will not be dependent on what former President Trump decides to do. But I think basically you're going to see a replay to some extent of the midterms messaging, Tom, that we saw. This contrast that the president is going to try to draw between himself and his predecessor on issues like, for example, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the DNC today, noting that it's the one-year anniversary of the passage of that, but also trying to make the case that former President Trump and Republicans who support him are extreme on a range of different issues, whether we are talking about the economy or abortion, things that we saw on the campaign trail. So I think that you've seen a preview of what we can expect in these coming months and over the next 2 years, if in fact President Biden does decide to run again. Now, there are some Democrats who are skeptical of a Biden presidency because of inflation, because of some of those issues. But at this point in time, you are already seeing the president ramp up his rhetoric.
Yeah, Kristen Welker with reporting that news about that tweet. With that, I do want to bring in our panel. Now, joining me is former Republican Congressman and NBC News political analyst Carlos Curbelo and President Biden's first White House press secretary, now a host for MSNBC, Jen Psaki. I also want to bring Chuck into this conversation as well. Jen, I'm going to start with you. Some people at home may be thinking, why would President Biden, with everything that's going on with Ukraine, a possible missiles being shot from Russia, he's at the G8 summit over there in Bali, why would he tweet about President Trump? And me and Chuck were just talking here off camera, and it's pretty clear he wants to elevate him because it's good for Democrats that the former president is running again.
Well, I also think he wants to show Democrats in the country he's going to punch back, whether it's Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or whomever it may be. And let's be real, I mean, it takes about 30 seconds to send a tweet. So I think it was just an effort on their part to make that very clear to the public as they watched parts of the speech.
Carlos, how worried are Republican leaders? How worried are Republicans like yourself, moderates who were never part of the MAGA movement? Do they think that this is now going to be a long, drawn-out 2 years?
Yeah, there's a long list of Republicans, Tom, who asked the president or people close to him to please at least postpone this announcement until after the Georgia runoff, because everyone remembers what happened the last time there were runoffs in Georgia and the former president got involved. Now Donald Trump will be making headlines again, and Republicans have come to the realization that when Donald Trump makes headlines, when he's prominent in the news, that's typically bad for their candidates, especially in swing states and swing districts. So I think for now, you're going to see a lot of the 2024 hopefuls take a step back, hopefully let Donald Trump trip over himself. They don't want to get into the mud with him, but they won't be able to do that forever. At some point, Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, anyone else who's thinking about running is going to have to confront Donald Trump and all the things that he's going to be saying about them.
Chuck, I think with the former president's announcement that he's going to run, with the current president's tweet just now, 2024 has started tonight. With that, are there any other Democrats who have a case more than President Biden to say, I can take on Trump, I can beat Trump?
Not while Donald Trump's there. I think that is, you know, as long as Donald Trump is essentially the face of the Republican Party, I think Joe Biden has more political capital inside the Democratic Party because, look, he pushed the democracy message when others in his party, including his chief rival from 2 years ago, Bernie Sanders, were questioning that decision. So I think he's got more capital inside this party than he's had even after he won the nomination the first time, I think, because of these midterms. So look, it's a different story if Trump goes away. Trump goes away, I think Biden suddenly does have to deal with people whispering and maybe thinking about it, but not right now. Not with, and I think, look, I think they want to elevate Trump. Trump's good for Biden, and I also think they think Trump is good for the Democratic Party.
I want to put that question to Jen Psaki, and also want to let our control room know if Garrett Haake, who's at Mar-a-Lago, who's at the speech, if he's available, I'd like to go to him as well. But the former president may still be talking. Jen, do you think that President Biden, when he was asked if he was going to run again, he said he thinks so, but he's going to make a final decision after the new year. Do you think he was waiting on former President Trump to see what he was going to do?
I think first he wants to talk to his family, his grandkids, his entire family. His granddaughter's getting married on Saturday. He's going to see them over Thanksgiving. There's no question, Tom, that Trump announcing is going to be front and center in his mind, even as he is managing the situation happening in Poland and overseas. That's why he ran in 2020 to begin with, right? He probably wouldn't have run otherwise if Trump had not been elected in 2016. So there's no question it's in his mind. It's probably the top of his list. I'm sure he'll be getting updates from aides, want those as well. And I think that's why that tweet went out. Yes, whether or not Trump is the right person to run against, for him to run against, that's debatable and I think an important thing to discuss. But he wants to show he's going to punch back if he runs and if Trump is the nominee.
Carlos, it's sort of interesting. The future of the Republican Party sort of starts tonight in the state of Florida. You felt the wrath of Donald Trump. You felt the wrath of the MAGA movement. But you also know Governor Ron DeSantis. Does Governor Ron DeSantis, in your opinion, have what it takes? Can he build the operation? Can he withstand the attacks? And I say this because in 2016, they said historically that was the greatest group of GOP candidates ever assembled for president, and Donald Trump knocked them all out. Does DeSantis have what it takes?
Well, Tom, let's just look at what Ron DeSantis has achieved. Just 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, he was a little-known member of Congress. He became governor of Florida, turned Florida red, at least for the foreseeable future, and today is perhaps the leading Republican candidate for president, if you believe some of the polls we've seen lately. So no one should underestimate Ron DeSantis. He's been very astute in the way he has used the Trump movement to grow, and now it appears that he is completely off the Trump train and ready to take on his former mentor. So Ron DeSantis has the same ambition and the same amount of ego Donald Trump has, so he will be a formidable opponent.
Carlos, Jen, Hallie, Kristen, Chuck Todd, I thank you all for being with us tonight. That concludes our special report. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Top story. We'll be right back. We're back now with a tragedy and mystery around the University of Idaho. 4 students found dead in an off-campus home, and it's called a crime of passion. That's what officials are calling it. A college community on edge while authorities still search for the suspect and answers. NBC News correspondent Gadi Schwartz has this story.
In the small university town of Moscow, Idaho, a massacre of 4 college students in the middle of the night so horrific, the coroner is still processing what she saw.
They'll be looking under fingernails. They'll be doing all sorts of different exams. It was very, very traumatic.
The 4 students and close friends found dead inside this home. An autopsy is pending, but police say an edged weapon like a knife was used in what they call a targeted attack. The friends seen together in this picture posted just hours before their murders. Ethan Chapin, a triplet from Washington, majoring in sport and tourism management in his freshman year, featured in a loving post written by another victim, Xana Kernodle, who wrote, "Life is so much better with you in it. Love you." Xana was a junior majoring in marketing and worked as a server at a local restaurant with victim Madison Mogan, a senior in marketing. And Kaylee Gonzalez, a senior whose family said was the ultimate go-getter and adventurer, tonight heartbroken by the news. Investigators releasing few details, while the mayor telling the New York Times it may have been a crime of passion.
Every little noise, I was like, is someone in the house? Like, I don't know. And it was just scary. Like, it's all just shocking.
Now a grieving college town waiting for answers about a murder scene too horrific to believe.
Gadi Schwartz joins us now from Los Angeles. Gadi, we were covering these horrific crimes happening on college campuses or near college campuses. Do the authorities have any information on a suspect or motive?
Yeah, Tom, that's the question that so many people on that campus have tonight. And when it comes to the motive, when it comes to the suspect, right now police are being extremely tight-lipped. Really all they're saying is at this point they don't have anybody in custody, but they do have reason to believe that this was a targeted attack, an isolated incident, and they don't think the community at large is at risk. Tom?
Okay, Gadi Schwartz with us. Gadi, we appreciate it. Coming up, the Trump-era immigration policy set to be restored. U.S. officials now planning to deport Cuban migrants by plane. The new NBC News reporting when we come back. All right, we're back now with Top Stories newsfeed and a lot of stories to get to. We begin with the arrest in connection to a missing woman in Florida. Authorities say Jose Luis Pacheco, you see him here, he was charged with murder in connection to the disappearance of his estranged wife, Mimos Dulcio. Dulcio was last seen on Thursday. Police say there is evidence to suggest Pacheco killed her inside their home. Her body has not been found. NBC News has exclusively learned the U.S. will begin deporting Cuban migrants who cross into the U.S. from Mexico. Two U.S. officials confirming to NBC News that the flights will begin in the coming weeks. The flights will be the first of their kind since the Trump administration. After Cuba agreed to accept deportees, more than 248,000 Cubans were apprehended crossing the southern border over the past year. Nearly 48,000 University of California employees are on strike. The faculty at all 10 UC campuses walking off the job, calling for better pay and benefits. It's one of the nation's biggest strikes in recent years. It has already canceled some classes just weeks ahead of final exams. The unions involved have not set an end date, but negotiations are still ongoing. And tens of thousands of minks are on the loose near the Ohio-Indiana border. Authorities say someone destroying fencing at a mink farm in Van Wert County, releasing up to 40,000 of the weasel-like animals from their cages. Pet and livestock owners now being warned to keep an eye out because the carnivorous mammals will prey on chickens and fish, including those in koi ponds. Several state agencies now trying to track down those minks. So far, no arrests. And we turn now to East Africa and the worsening drought we've been reporting on, 22 million facing starvation. But the headmistress at one girls' school in Kenya is trying to bring hope to her students amid the desperation. Keir Simmons has this report.
These girls are learning to hope despite horrifying hardship. Finally, they have fresh water at St. Perpetual Girls' School, part of UNICEF's work to ease a fast-developing drought in East Africa.
In front of you is
their performance tells of terrible times at home.
Our animals are dying because of the long droughts. Our parents are fled in search of food and water.
Without food, some families forced to marry their young daughters off as child brides. Their school in Lodwar fights to protect them from that fate. Their headmistress is an inspiration.
I am their mentor.
You're like a mother to
every one of them. And I'm also their mentor because when they have seen that there is a woman that has gone ahead of them, it can encourage them to learn.
You can show these girls that a woman can
make it.
Can make it.
Can make it in life. Even in these harsh times, with the little they have, with no food, they can still make it.
The school has some food, but she has to ration it. Only the very youngest and these students facing exams get lunch.
Yeah, this food is porridge. See, porridge. We drink porridge.
You'd think that might knock their spirits. Not these girls. Are you hopeful that you will do well in your exams?
Yeah, of course. Yes. We are very hopeful. All of us want to grow up, want to be like journalists.
You want to be journalists?
Yeah, especially for me, I want to be a journalist when I grow up. That's my dream.
Is it hard to keep telling them that message with everything that's happening?
It's not hard. It's not hard. They embrace it, especially when they see that motherly love in you.
An hour's drive from the school, crossing riverbeds dry from the 4-year drought. More evidence of a climate change disaster impacting, by one estimate, 22 million people in East Africa right now. We find a community in unimaginable conditions. We just arrived in this community and look, everywhere there are these deep, deep holes. The desert is punctured with holes at least 30 feet deep. And then we see this. Mothers and even their children clambering down, disappearing underground, risking their lives to pass up buckets of brown water. It caved in over here?
Yes, that cave over there.
It caved in over here already?
It made people fall inside.
People fall?
Yes.
People fall down when they're going down there?
Yes, when they're going down.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they say one mother was killed when a hole fell in. Aren't you frightened to go down there?
Because of the problems they face, they have no choice.
We're thirsty, Nachomin says. When you see families having to do this just to get water, it's so frustrating when you know how possible it is to provide clean water. I sit down with the village elder. He is 70. He was born here. He has never seen anything like this. We had a good rain about 10 years ago, he tells me, when it was all pastures here. 10 years ago was your last good rain. 10 years ago. You see the depths of the holes. They are so deep because of the lack of rain. We need a way to get water so that the people will not have to risk their lives in these holes, he says. As we leave, the women dance, a tradition dramatizing their plight. While back at the school, supported by UNICEF,
it's a big victory, this place, but the challenge is much bigger than this one place.
The girls told us they love learning and the hope of a future that's a little less uncertain. Their dreams undimmed.
And we thank our Keir Simmons for that report as we continue our global watch here. In Australia, the dramatic rescues taking place amid major flooding across the country. New video shows rescuers airlifting residents and pets to safety. The floodwaters, you can see here how high they are, cutting off houses completely, the water rising to the roofs there. Just in the last 2 days, more than 200 flood rescues taking place, and this is Australia's fourth major flood crisis this year. To the G20 summit, Kelly O'Donnell was just telling us about this. President Biden meeting with Italy's controversial new prime minister, Giorgia Meloni. The meeting is Biden's first with Meloni, a far-right politician and a member of the Conservative Brothers of Italy party, which has been tied to neo-fascism. The White House says Meloni and Biden discussed their continued support for Ukraine, relations with China, as well as the continued alliance between the U.S. and Italy. The UN says the world's population, get this, has reached 8 billion people. According to their new projections, India is expected to surpass China as the most populous country in the next year. The report also says a lot of the world's growth comes from developing countries in Africa. The UN projecting the world will reach 9 billion people by 2037. Coming up, a neighbor's helping hand, how one team came to the aid of a local farmer and helped them navigate through a challenging time. It's a special story. Stay with us. Finally tonight, helping hands. The teen girl stepping up in a big way to help her neighbor when he was struggling to take care of his farm. Boyd Hooper from our Minneapolis affiliate, Care 11, has this heartwarming story.
Nighttime during harvest is a special time.
Can you get by that intake down there?
For Steve Brake.
This is actually probably my favorite time of the day.
The fourth-generation farmer, alone with his thoughts.
It's like you're in your own little world out here.
Not far removed from a much darker time.
When the priest gave me last rites, I didn't think I'd walk out of there, much less ever farm again.
I was supposed to be sleeping.
That's Steve. Okay. Harvest time last year, confused and barely able to see.
I remember watching the Gopher game today.
After the rapid onset of a rare nerve condition.
That was how he was the first 2 weeks in the hospital. Really not even knowing where he was at or what was going on.
But Mary Brake knew there would be no mending her husband's spirit if he weren't somehow able to climb back onto a tractor.
He came home the end of October. 4 or 5 days later, he wanted to go out and try to plow. So I went with him on a Sunday afternoon. I went with him.
How did you feel about riding around in the tractor?
Well, I didn't want to do it every day, all day long.
And that's what he wanted to do.
And that's what he wanted to do. And then Abby called. I did it. You can do it.
Abby Reitz, who slid into the seat next to Steve.
You don't want to get out, do you?
No.
16 years old at the time and living in the farm community of Wilmot, in the Gray Ranch house right next door to Steve and Mary Brake.
She wanted to know if she could go out and ride with him, and I'm like, yep.
From that moment on, Abby took her still ailing neighbor under her wing, helping him navigate.
How come we're not going?
The controls,
You gotta.
the fields,
It's been a little weird today.
and life.
If it wouldn't have been for her, I couldn't have been out there because, I couldn't see well enough to even drive the tractor home. And then we'd pull into the fuel pump on a freezing cold night. She would climb up on that tractor and fill it with fuel.
After school until 10 or 11 at night, all day, Saturdays and Sundays.
Abby was, telling me we need to get out and drive that tractor.
Abby remained at Steve's side.
And as long as she was out there, you didn't have to worry.
That's right.
Then one day,
Right time. Shine.
Steve and Abby switched seats.
I'm more comfortable over here now than over there.
Until eventually,
This tractor has a massage seat.
Abby earned her own ride.
Yeah.
You've never probably expected to be saying my daughter the farmer.
No.
Andrea Reitz
No.
is Abby's mom.
That's just where she wants to be.
Take last month, when Abby wanted to skip her high school band trip to Texas.
1, 2, ready.
So as not to miss even a week with Steve for this year's harvest.
We're just running one for now.
She left only after he promised to send her these daily video updates.
As you can see, Tractor Princess, that seat is still empty, and I'm occupying the throne today.
In a sense, I was worried about leaving him. I've never been that far away from him since he got sick.
She's a granddaughter I've never had.
The granddaughter
We just got really close in that tractor.
who chose to use one of Steve's tractors as the backdrop for her senior portraits, who can spill 10 bushels of corn.
This is what you don't want to have happen right here.
And still get a hug.
This is bad.
Who got a busy farmer to clear his day to attend the confirmation of the girl who blessed him.
She is a superhero to me. I mean, she basically took a year out of her life so I could get this back, my life back.
Back from the brink, back on a tractor.
I like this time of night.
Thanks to the girl who has Steve Brakes back.
So you can stay out here a little later?
Boyd Hooper, KARE 11 News, Nobles County, Minnesota.
And we thank Boyd for that report from, again, our Minneapolis affiliate, KARE 11. We thank you so much for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.